Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Come Let Us Reason podcast. This will be an interesting podcast today as we are kind of partnering with another organization, the Kirkwood Center for Theology and Ethics. And I'll be joined with a fellow there, Anthony Costello, who he and I have been working quite a bit on this new project. Tell you a little bit more about that. But also today we want to talk about some hot button issues that Christians are facing today. These are deep things that you're reading in the news all the time, but maybe you don't hear good explanations or good understandings of how Christians should be approaching these topics. We're talking about things like transhumanism or CRT or how to deal with issues like wokeness. All kinds of stuff coming up. Stay with us on this. Come let us reason together. And hello again, everyone. Welcome back. Today, I'm excited to be joined once again by my friend Anthony Costello. Tony, of course, you were with us once before on the podcast where we started talking about basically outsourcing baby making to the technology of the day. And that actually got quite a bit of attention. But we wanted to kind of expand that a little bit and talk more about some additional things that are creeping up in the church. And there's a lot of stuff going on today with technology that we really have to wrestle with. First of all, as I mentioned in my intro, Tony, you and I are both fellows at the Kirkwood Center for Theology and Ethics. And why don't you go ahead and tell everyone a little bit about the Kirkwood Center? It's a brand new organization. Let them know what's going on there and why we're involved.
Yeah, well, as you know, Lenny, because you've been intimately involved with the Kirkwood Center, so this is a project that 10 of us have now started. Most of us are related in some way to Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. We either have our degrees from there or have taught there or are still teaching there, some of our members. And, I think what really drove or was motivated this project is a realization. I mean, could be another hot button topic itself. That what is the future of Christian education? There's a lot of hand wringing right now over what is the future of the traditional model of Christian education in the sense of the Christian seminary, where, it used to always be the case that, if you're going to try and lead a church or be a pastor is your primary vocation, that some seminary training was needed. Go off to seminary for 4 years, do a traditional degree and get an MDiv or some kind of degree in theology or biblical studies. This is becoming, I think, increasingly difficult to do for all kinds of social reasons and because of the technology aspect as well. This was, I think, something that became a little bit more acute during COVID as universities, campuses had to shut down. And then also online education became more in the spotlight. So there's been a lot of people thinking about how to both bridge the gap between the church and the academy, but now just the nature of the academy at all and how Christian education is going to develop along with the culture, and how we can sort of be proactive about embedding Christian education right back into the church where from whence it originated. Yeah. And maybe not just Bible, theology, philosophy, but also education in social, cultural issues, politics, so on and so forth. So we've put together a team of really good thinkers, solid, faithful men who have a passion for education and for, I don't think we're doing anything new or novel, but we're trying to be another resource for the church to draw from as we, as things just change and change dramatically in the culture. I mean, we need to ask questions like, how are we going to grow the next generation of Christian pastors
Hmm.
if it's becoming increasingly difficult to go off either for financial reasons or whatever it may be, and get those academic degrees. So that's the main focus of the Kirkwood Center for Theology and Ethics is Christian education for the church. And of course, we'll have different branches. We have our own podcast. We'll have a writing ministry and so on and so forth. But the goal is to educate and re-educate
Yeah.
the church.
Yeah,
Yeah.
matter of fact, what's interesting, of course, the growth of the non-denominational movement means that there is a whole generation of pastors who didn't go to seminary at all, didn't even know that there was a need to, because that seemed to be more denominationalistic, and so
Yeah.
they, I've always said you don't know what you don't know, and a lot of times there's a lot of depth and nuance that people miss, and of course, part of the problem in not being able to discuss a wealth of issues. By the time you get to a pastorate, you're busy, right? Pastors are busy
Yep.
folks. They've got to
Yeah.
do benevolence ministry, visiting the folks in the hospitals, running the books of the church,
Right.
dealing with tithing and maintenance issues, and then still preparing their Sunday sermon, their midweek study, maybe the Sunday school class, having internal meetings with students and teachers and everything that goes with that, and it's tough then at that point to be able to take the time to explore broader topics.
And that was definitely on our heart when he started this. The pastor just being overwhelmed,
Yeah.
and needing to outsource some of the education of the church to, I don't know if you want to call it parachurch ministries, but to ministries that can come in and help shepherd the flock, especially at in the life of the mind,
Yeah.
we might say. And we're not the only ones doing this. There are other ministries out there. There are other scholars who are trying to develop their own resources for the local church. But we're local church focused. We
Right.
want to really be a support staff for the local pastor, who, again, as you said, is just overwhelmed these days with issues. And you can't study everything. I
No.
mean, you just can't be an expert on everything. And
Yeah.
obviously, the pastor has to be Bible first, but there's so many cultural issues, and pastors can't be expert on every single issue
Right.
these days, in addition to doing all of their, as you said, all their other types of
So
ministries. So we're there to help. Yeah.
and this is one of the things we're going to talk about today is what are these issues? What are some of these problems or areas that we need to delve into? Now we have a couple of things that have been brought up in really that are top of news, I guess I would say. The first one we're going to look at, I think, artificial intelligence, and then I think we'll move into technology more broadly, which is a little bit of a tail on what we talked about last time, and is technology replacing really the human, what should be human conditions and human aspects. We'll talk about critical theory, Neo-Paganism, which I think is interesting, and then Christian nationalism. These are all, again,
Yeah.
you're seeing them in the New York Times, you're seeing them in social media. So, but let's start with artificial intelligence, AI. What's the bugaboo about that? Why is that garnering so much interest today?
Yeah, and I don't want to put myself out as an expert. I mean, I know several. I know a few philosophers of mind, especially who worked on certain kinds of problems related to AI. But I think what we're trying to do here is just, you know, the four areas that just I don't even know if hot button doesn't even seem to. Uh, they're more than just that. They're sort of like massive culture shifting issues. So we just feel like the church has to take these quite seriously, and we really need some good theological and biblical thinking on these. So with regards to artificial intelligence, I will say, and I just earlier this morning was meeting with a former colleague from Talbot who she went off to Aberdeen and did her PhD in the philosophy of technology. and her dissertation was specifically on human enhancements. And so we were talking a little bit about AI. I think with regards to AI, one thing I might dispel that I think is a myth, and I don't, one can do work on this, but I don't think it's terribly necessary. We're not going to create consciousness. Okay. I think that the real top-notch scholarly literature from the philosophers of mind and others who work in this area, nobody really thinks that we can rearrange the material components of the universe and create consciousness.
Yeah.
Okay. That's not going to happen. So, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a serious ethical and even in a sense ontological issue on our hands with what is called what has been called strong AI. Okay, so the intelligence component is there. That you have machines that can learn, that can write their own program. I mean, this has been around for a while, but it's getting more and more sophisticated. And how that can affect us as a society. I mean, I don't want to speculate too much.
Let's unpack a couple of these things a little bit.
This is the issue I think we're up against. Yeah. Not that we're going to have a new kind of consciousness.
So let me give you a couple of examples. First, we'll start with a classic thought experiment in philosophy. This was first proffered by John Searle, I think, in 1970 or so. It's called the Chinese room or the Chinese box experiment. And the idea is Searle pictures himself locked into a room with a supercomputer, and there's a couple of slots, and in one slot he gets a string of Chinese characters on a page. Now Searle can't read Chinese. The characters don't mean anything to him. They're just he recognizes them as perhaps a language because he's seen them referenced elsewhere, but beyond that he has no idea what they mean. However, he does know that if he sees these characters, he can put them in a certain order into this computer, and the computer will then spit out a second set of numbers, a second set of Chinese characters, I should say, not numbers. And it's been also proposed, if it was a series of books, you'd find the right book and look it up, and you'd find the matching characters, and you'd have a string that's attached to it, right? This is how computer programs work. You input, you look it up, and then you have an output. And then so what happens is he pushes the string of characters, copies them down, and puts them through the second slot in the door on the outbound side. Now, for all he's doing is he's doing rote instruction. It doesn't really mean anything. But the people on the outside of the box who don't see anything, they think, first of all, that there's a wise man in here and who knows Chinese. And when we give him a specific Chinese question, he comes back with amazing insights in Chinese. And what Searle's trying to say is, no, this is how computers work. They're just replacing characters A with characters B based on certain set of rules. That's all they're doing. They have no cognizance. Right. And no matter what you do, no matter how complex you make the rules, ultimately it still breaks down to a rule that's devoid of cognizance. So that's why when we talk about AI, we're not talking about Skynet. We're not talking about computers that will be sentient. However, there's just last week, there was a fascinating set of war games that was played using AI and allowing AI to run a simulation. And the simulation was to strike certain targets and avoid striking other targets. And what they did was they would assign value to the machine that got the most targets, and that did the most damage, or however you want to phrase it. And so, but they put that goal as the primary goal. And what they found is the simulator began taking out the humans who were throttling the AI components. So basically, the simulated missiles were turned back on the controllers who were throttling it, because the computer, through its simulation, figured out, well, I could get more points if these guys stop thwarting me from destroying all of the targets I wanted to destroy. So it literally, because again, it's logicless. It just did the math calculations.
Right.
And it says, okay, there's a hindrance here. Let's stop that hindrance, and then I can go on and I can make the most points possible. And that's all it was reading. And so that's the problem, is there are unintended consequences. There are factors that the computer now can amass that we wouldn't necessarily either see as pertinent. We discount them without even, giving it a second glance, or we would have not known about them at all. But it takes every possibility with equal weight because it doesn't have a value system. And then it can actually do malicious things like, destroy the governors, the security agents who are trying to stop it from being more destructive than it needs to be.
Right.
So
yeah, because we're kind of reducing humanity and human society down to a quantifiable sort of a calculation.
Right.
And the computer is there to calculate.
Right.
And so what the danger is there's a couple dangers. One is what human beings would put into the computer. So who's got control of the strong AI, right? Mm-hmm. And who has a value, right? So that's one aspect of it. And of course, we've had dystopian novels about this for a long time now. So what human culture has control over the strong AI, and then how could it be programmed to be used? But it could also be that it's possible, I suppose, that there could be a benevolent programmer, but there's error. There's this sort of erroneous things put in, and then the computer also then, this strong AI carries out a certain kind of programming that does have, as you said earlier, unintended consequences, but that are terrible in nature and scope. Another thing that this colleague of mine was pointing out today, that I had never thought about, and we'll have to have her on to talk about it more, but I thought it was quite an interesting speculation. And this is her speculation, so I'll have to give credit to Emily Stevens for pointing this out. And again, we'll have her on to maybe discuss this, is how a strong AI might eliminate certain classes in society, and her speculation was that you would the upper class, the sort of elite class, gets replaced by the AI, because everything that you think is being done at the highest levels of thinking and computing and calculating by the so-called maybe intellectual class is just replaced by the system. And then what you really have is only what we might call like a middle or lower class that are just there to keep the machine running. And I never thought about that. It was very interesting.
And there's a fascinating book called I, Robot by Isaac Asimov. I'm not know if you're familiar with that science fiction writer, and it's one of the primary.
The title sounds familiar.
Well, there was a movie that Will Smith starred in that was theoretically, but it was not based on the book as much as it was based on another tome. But the book itself is a series of short stories, and Asimov does some interesting things in there where he explores this idea. First, he creates what he calls the 3 rules of robotics. And the 3 rules of robotics are, number 1 is, I shall not harm any person. And then number 2 is, I shall not, I shall do everything I can to sustain or preserve myself, my existence, unless of course it contradicts with rule number 1. And then number 3 is, I will do everything I can to help benefit society unless it contradicts with 1 or 2, kind of thing. It's this idea. So there are these 3 fundamental rules of robotics that are supposed to be embedded into every robot. And what Asimov ultimately does is he teases out an idea of a world leader. And because the world leader can make the calculations broadly, is that world leader then better suited to be a robot than it is to be a human being? And it's a utilitarian question. It's based on a utilitarian ethic. as well, because it doesn't take the spiritual into account in all of these ethics. That's the first flaw, is it doesn't take our spiritual nature and our relation to God, because it may be better for us to inflict harm on ourselves for the glory of God than it may be in that regard.
And that's where I think there has to be theological thinking about this, because if the presupposition by those designing AI is that human beings are just biological machines, or reducible to biological machines, you may put in the right kinds of programs to keep those biological machines alive. But that doesn't mean that what AI could do won't have drastic negative effects on human societies. Given what we know, that we're more than biological machines, right?
Right.
What I'm saying is, you can imagine a world where your body's doing great, right? Mm-hmm. Like in the Matrix, because you're all hooked up. You're hooked up. You're totally just, now we talked about last time, Nozick's experience machine, but where your body is fine, but who knows what's going on in your soul.
Right. And so and how do we value? There's other things that we take into account as well. So there's been a couple of famous accidents with autonomous cars driving in, say, Arizona, who's allowing some of these test programs. And what do we do with that? Because the car has to make decisions based on what? Number of people? Well, if you're looking at, 2 adults and 2 children, which way does the car, and the car has to swerve one way or the other, where does it go? Who does it choose? Or if it has to protect the driver versus a child, I know what I'm going to do as the driver. I'm going to stare into the wall rather than hit the kid, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we would do. And but when we do this, the thing that really scares me is we're right in the middle of the trolley car problem, and the guys who are programming these systems, I don't know that they've had the philosophy to understand the depth of the issue. So
yeah, that's interesting. So the trolley problem, but where you don't have a human agent now involved in the moral choice.
In the moral choice.
The moral choice itself is outsourced.
That's right. That's exactly right.
To at least a programmer who programmed the machine. Right. Maybe you got to go there.
But there's always exceptions to the rule.
How much is he responsible in the programming of the machine that ultimately seemed to have made the moral choice? Right. In your stead.
And as you know, the trolley problem, every time you add a variation, it becomes more difficult, and it becomes a different scenario. And people who would answer, well, I would switch to kill the 1 rather than the 5. Then we say, well, what if you're just pushing a guy onto the tracks? All of a sudden, that's a different issue. So
So there's legal nightmares. There's a whole legal realm here that also becomes incredibly complex and problematic. And then the other area that I've been concerned about, and we see this just with like the use of chat GPT to write college essays or papers, is the sort of intellectual component, the knowledge, how our use of knowledge is affected by AI, whether it be in using AI to do certain kinds of intellectual work on our behalf, how does that affect us as Aristotle was said, thinking rational creatures, where we can even outsource sort of like our thinking processes, in a sense. Our investigation into the nature of reality becomes quite different if we just can use strong AI in such a way where it's like, what does research look like?
Well, and it's
if
interesting.
I can just sort of plug things in and boom, it's It's done it for me.
Yeah.
What does the creative act
but
look like?
but
So
it doesn't
these are all
necessarily
kinds of things.
it doesn't necessarily take in even in that aspect it doesn't take into account the context in which you would want to take into account. So I played around with chat GPT and I asked it to write my biography, and it was fascinating because it came up with it gave me credit for journal articles for journals that don't exist. I mean, it does all
Right.
because what it does is it's using predictive processing, and it says if these two words are here, what's the next logical word that passes? Not necessarily saying, well, that with four words together, that's a journal reference that has to actually be in the real world, and so
Right.
it will do that same thing with, I mean, that's where AI is at right now. Now it may get better, it may
Yeah.
get more you know broadly focused and able to do things with a little bit more, well, with a little bit less falsehood, but
Accuracy.
it's still, it's not necessarily mining for what you're mining for. What it might be able to do is to show you the places where you've missed, but I think you
Right.
need to do the research yourself first. I think you need
Well,
to.
and I think what that causes then is that is public becomes if things
Right.
like that AI created products become what we call sort of public knowledge. Um, but we don't know who really produced that knowledge. And I'm not talking about, where did it come from? What was its
Yeah. What
source?
was the
And
source?
of
Is the
course,
source
yeah.
reliable? Would it?
And then yeah, when we talk everything we talk about just in like in our studies, like the reliability of, sources that we have to have reliable sources in order to get to, you know, knowledge, good knowledge and stuff like this. I don't know. I mean, and then the potential for deception of just a massive amount of people because everybody's connected.
Yeah,
So
that's
the
right.
potential there for deception and the the increasing difficulty of discerning accurate, um, accuracy from inaccuracy, facts from, just things were put together because they semantically fit,
Right.
right?
Right.
They didn't correspond, they just cohered. Well, look, I didn't even think about it. I mean, it could be sort of an epistemic problem there of like, you get an article written, does it correspond to reality, or is it just the words cohered well together and
Yeah.
it's sort of
Well,
a
even
coherent
or
problem,
is
but
there
it
an
doesn't correspond to
underlying
the truth.
is there an underlying motivation that sits outside of that as well? I mean, when you look at for example, the studies of Pfizer on the COVID vaccine, where they're saying 96% efficacy rate against infection and transmission of infection, and we know that the CDC had published those numbers, and a lot of people got the vaccine not because they were a high risk group who couldn't necessarily weather the infection, but because they didn't want to pass it on to a member of their family, say, who's in the high risk group. And we find out that those numbers now they don't hold. Even though they had a
Yeah,
large study sample, they don't hold. So you need to understand those kinds of things.
well,
And
and to point out, I mean, this is something that, and to bump up the numbers on our video here, that Tucker Carlson pointed out, casually pointed out in his speech at the Heritage Foundation a couple months ago about, you know, the internet promised something like free information for all, right? It
right,
was going to be an enlightening thing, but in reality, it's become a way for people to really control information without sounding too conspiracy theory. It has become a way to control and centralize information. It's not the freedom of information that we were all maybe hoping it would be back in the 1980s and 1990s. And that's quite dangerous. And one of the things that Carlson pointed out is I thought was very incisive was don't throw out your old books. Don't throw out your non-digital um, you know, sources of information because those can't be changed.
That's right.
So
That's,
make sure you got a couple Bibles, a couple paper Bibles in your home.
yeah,
Because if you're solely relying on digital forms of the Bible, who knows what words can be changed?
and there and that's not just
And it's
hyperbole, because look at the deer, the Hurt Locker is or no, I'm sorry, was it the French Connection? They've just been up in arms where they just found out a couple of days ago that the rebroadcast, all digital editions, and every Blu-ray that's being put out now has a deleted scene because the basically the guy uses the N-word in it. Gene Hackman
yeah,
uses the N-word in
I
it.
know that scene.
So they've
Yeah.
edited like 9 minutes of the movie out, and you can't find it anywhere now if you stream it or if
Now
you.
they're trying to do that with paper novel with printed books as well.
Yeah, Huckleberry
The Roald
Finn
Dahl books
and
and
Robert
everything.
Ronald Dahl. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's obviously much easier to do if everything's digitalized, is digital. So, but this is real though. This is actually Lenny and Tony talking
Yeah.
to you.
That's right. That's right. We're not a simulation at all. But that brings up and the control of information. We mentioned critical theory, and
Yeah.
of course, this a lot of people would understand it as the word wokeness, perhaps, because critical theory is broader than critical race theory. A lot of people hear of CRT, but CRT doesn't stand on its own. It has a history of being a subset of a larger movement, though in the legal classification it really kind of came into its own through legal means, whereas critical theory was more of a broader ideology against society. But
Yeah.
what's the status of critical theory? Could you define what wokeness is for us?
I would just call wokeness a popular level expression of critical theory.
And
Uh,
so how would you say critical? What would you? How could somebody identify something as being critical theory? What's the things that they all share?
yeah, so well, critical theory is and do not let anybody tell you differently. It is founded on some basic Marxist principles, right? I mean, the term critical theory was ascribed to a group of men who started an institute in Frankfurt, Germany in around 1923. Okay, the three big names who started this institute were Max Horkheimer. These are all German philosophers, all who called themselves openly and, you know, upfront Marxist thinkers in the Marxist tradition. And these were men like Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno. Those are the two most important names. But actually, the third one is Herbert Marcuse, who is the most impactful, we might say, of the three Frankfurt School thinkers. Now, there were other men involved in that project that are somewhat lesser known. At the early stages, Eric Fromm, the social psychologist, was involved. Otto Neumann and others. But the ones that are mainly known for the more philosophical work are Horkheimer, Adorno, and Marcuse, especially. Um, and they understood. I'd say they understood their philosophy as a rejection of the Enlightenment, which saw human reason as a universal kind of for idea that there was sort of reason, capital R, that all human beings sort of had the capacity to um, uh, use reason, right, in order to get to certain sort of universal or foundational truths. Okay. So critical theory is a rejection that there is such a thing. So one of the things that the guys like Horkheimer or Adorno will talk about is the reification of reason. Like, oh, there's this thing, reason, that we all sort of have and can participate in and utilize in order to discover truths about human nature and how we might live in the world. So they would reject that, right? There's societies, there's social life, right? And societies sort of produce or create based on more fundamental material realities. This is the Marxist part, right? There's a substructure, right, of just material stuff, and what produces reason is the material stuff and how it's arranged and how we live with our as human beings vis-a-vis the resources that are available to us, right? So it's a reversal of Hegelianism, which saw reason itself as sort of like almost like the logos, like moving humanity forward, right? But it was very abstract to sort of an ultimate end.
Right.
Marx flips that on its head and says there's only material resources, and all of human development is a battle over material resources, the dialectic of materialism. So the critical theorists are in that camp.
Yeah,
okay? They're in the camp but then in addition to just material, there's social realities. Materialism, the material resources sort of produce the kinds of people that live in society, but a new kind of reality and a new kind of reasoning emerges when people interact with each other in society.
In new
and we
ways.
could call this social theory as well.
Yeah. So,
but it's all relative to the material and the people living in that material.
Yeah. So let me see if I can basically I'll sum it up in this way. There are always winners and losers in societies, right? What those critical theorists would say is there are two groups of people usually, and this comes from the Marxist ideology. Marx saw this in economic terms. Other people see this in terms of political power. There's the oppressor class and the oppressed class. Okay.
Yeah, once you get to the social level,
right,
then you have these problems emerge of competition.
Of oppressor and oppressed. Yeah. And the oppressors have a presupposition because their society allows them, or is built in such a way that their reasoning allows them to continue that oppression. So it's the very presuppositions of society itself that allows that oppression. It's hegemonic power. Is
right, and you can put in any social class as the oppressor. It could be based on wealth. It could be based on race. You could put one race. You could insert one race into the oppressor class and another race into the oppressed. It could be gender or sex,
sexual orientations,
right? And that's all been done. So that's
ableism, fat shaming. No matter what thing you're talking about, it's all. This is why we say critical theory is more broadly the problem than just CRT.
Framework.
So
of everything is social reality.
Right. So there's an oppressor class and oppressed class. The oppressor class continues to dominate through hegemonic power. That's
right.
And in order to
through the manipulation of resources and social reality.
And in order to escape that, the oppressed class must overthrow not simply the oppressors themselves, but the very undergirding civilizational or societal frameworks in which they're trapped
that allow that dichotomy of society to occur, and the goal is
to reimagine the whole thing.
Democracy. The goal is perfect democracy, the utopian society where there's no hierarchical structures.
Right.
Everybody's absolutely here's the problem with all critical theory. Everybody is absolutely autonomous, but also absolutely equal. So you in their autonomy, nobody can tell anybody else what to do.
Right.
Right. So everybody's sort of a law unto themselves because there's no hierarchy, there's no authority structures. Right. It's a perfect horizontal, I can't even say structure of authority. Everybody's an authority to themselves. Again, I mean, we're not talking, there's no transcendent person here. There's no God.
This is
there's no
this is the
principle.
equity portion of
Perfectly even out, but we're all supposed to be able to live together as
and explore
autonomous creatures.
our ultimate happiness, and somehow nobody loses in any aspect. You're all perfectly happy. Yeah, and you can see the tension in that right away.
The insidious part of it is there's no transcendent standard.
Right. What defines happiness?
Like
what
we're all
defines
supposed to,
good?
In some way, know how to live, but we're 8 billion people on the planet. We're also, but if we don't have a common goal or understanding, we're all autonomous. How are we supposed to do that? What are we shooting for? We all have different. There's 8 billion different. At the end of the day, there's 8 billion different variations of what we think might be the case. And I really think what all critical theories eventually wind up as is basically the gray town in C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce.
Mm-hmm.
This vast city of individuals who just go further and further apart, and they're totally isolated in their own little solipsistic world, navel gazing.
Which is almost an analogy or a metaphor for hell to some degree.
I think it is a hell.
Yeah, that's right.
And now, so again, you got different versions of this depending on who you want to place in the oppressor slot and who you want to place in the oppressed slot. Now, the thing about critical theory, it points out some true aspects of history and society.
Sure.
Like there are actual oppressors and oppressed.
Yeah.
Nobody's denying that. Right?
And there have been certain systemic frameworks, slavery being the easiest one to, or maybe the Hindu class structure, the Hindu caste system.
Caste system. Right.
Yeah.
And of course, the Nazis were actual oppressors over the Jews and the Poles.
Those exist, but to reduce everything as those oppressed classes are the primary drivers of one's identity, which is another, I think, fundamental flaw that critical theory makes.
It's a reduction. It's still a reductionism. It's still a form of reductionism where people get reduced down to their social features instead of what the Enlightenment scientific thinkers would reduce everybody down to their biological or chemical features. This is a reduction down to just your social identity.
And again,
there's no imago Dei, there's no metaphysical status you have. You're just an embedded social being.
Yeah.
And it's almost deterministic in that sense that if you're, let's say today, white, Marx would have said, if you're bourgeois, you just think this way. You can't do other because it's where you've been embedded in society, even if you had no choice in where you were born or to what parents or in what class of people you were born that way. There's a great diminishment, I think, of freedom of the will.
Well, it's
because you almost are what your social class
isn't it interesting? There's a real famous objection that a lot of people throw to Christians in the apologetics world. Of course you're a Christian. You're an American. If you were born in, if you were born in Saudi Arabia, you'd be a Muslim. And the first response I have to that is, can I introduce you to some people who were born in Saudi Arabia and converted? It's not like we're running a program. There is autonomy in the sense of rationality, and if you start denying that, you can break free from these thought processes.
But this is what we see this play out a lot in critical race theory. We say certain, like for example, African Americans, or what's called Black Americans, who don't toe the line of sort of like a very liberal leftist agenda, they'll be accused of not thinking like Black people.
Yeah.
They'll be called, Larry Elder, who you remember ran for governor here on the recall election, was called the black face of white supremacy. Why? Because he didn't think the way the left the critical
I mean,
theorist
just
think.
think about the contradiction even in that phrase, but it evokes
Yeah,
it's a nice emotive. It evokes an
right.
emotion. Is all they're trying to do. They're
It
not trying
it
to be.
evokes emotion.
Yeah, they're
There's
not.
a whole rhetorical component
Absolutely.
to any critical theory that we'd have to do a whole nother podcast on that.
I've actually done a talk on the
Yeah,
language game and how they're
the language, right?
how they keep playing with that. But that's that. You're right.
Which is also, I mean, that's also part of Marxist theory is how to manipulate people through the use of
well. Then you
language.
get into Gramsci
Yeah.
and you get into pedagogy and you get into all of those
And
levers.
I will say this, and I haven't seen anybody. This is I'm going to reveal a little bit what I would like to do as a book project. There is a sense in which I feel because if we posit that all movements of the human mind, all ideologies are at the end of the day looking for something salvific,
Yeah.
some kind of liberation from our existential crises,
Right.
right? Then you could ask the question: what is critical theory and the critical theories that have been what are they looking for? What's the telos here? And it's some kind of liberatory thing. It's some kind of like a release from our existential condition. But what is the thing that's going to do it? And when you get into critical theory as opposed to scientism, which so you could pit scientism and critical
Oh
theory
yeah.
against,
Absolutely.
and one component of critical theory that I think is where science thought it would be investigation of the natural world and maybe the development of certain technologies that would liberate us. With critical theory, it's almost like language itself will play the role of the savior. How we talk will literally change the world we live. So language becomes almost the means to their idea of heaven,
Yeah.
heaven on earth. And I think the other theological point I want to make about critical theory is it makes it takes the idea of original sin, but it attributes it only to certain people,
Right.
right?
Right.
So America's original sin, or when I say is racism or slavery, but it takes original sin, it takes even our Christian sensibility of we're all sinners, but it relieves certain groups, the oppressed, from being sinful or having the macula. And it says the macula is only possessed by certain others. Now this is just the demonization of this is just tribalism
Yeah.
at the end of the day, a form of tribalism.
Absolutely.
But where you're using the Christian sense of original sin, attributing it to the oppressor group, and our colleague Logan Zapier said this is kind of what Nietzsche did with resentment, right? With his theory of resentment. So it seems to be that Nietzsche was onto something there. But this is kind of what's happening: is you attribute original sin not to all of humanity, not to all of God's creatures, but only to certain ones. And then the persons who are the oppressed become almost like morally pristine agents.
Right.
And this is how you win the political fight.
Yeah.
This is how you win the political fight. So as far as the status, I think the church is starting to catch up. There's been some good popular level works, Vodi Baucham's work, Fault Lines. Neil Shenvi's done a lot of good stuff on this, and I just
his book that's
just
going to be
posted-
coming out is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, it looks in the table of context he just posted it. He's done his homework, so and I hope to do a little more writing on this as well. So it's still critical though, pun intended. I just had an interview with Owen Anderson at ASU, and it's crazy. The DEI stuff is the concrete expression of critical theory. It's critical theory in the practical outworking, and it's becoming it's very totalitarian. Yeah. There's a brilliant. I know we got to move on, but there was a conference, a little esoteric knowledge for the audience. There was a conference held in 1961 in Frankfurt. I'm sorry, I think it was in Hamburg, Germany. But two of the speakers were Theodor Adorno, one of the founding fathers of critical theory, against Karl Popper, who was a philosopher of science, very well-known philosopher of science, who was critical of scientism to some degree. He was a more sophisticated thinker than Ayer and some of these other positivists. But one of the commentators who was watching the debate, I think it was Shelsky, made the comment that inherent in both Popper's advocacy of science and Adorno's critical theory was the potential for totalitarianism. And there was a mutual accusation of both. That I'm sorry, Popper was accusing Adorno, and Adorno was accusing Popper,
Right.
that in their systems was the potential for totalitarianism.
Right.
And all we can say 60 years later is both of them were right.
That's right.
Both of them were right. There's a potential of totalitarianism in scientism. We saw that during COVID.
Yeah.
And there's an obvious potential for totalitarianism in critical theory. We're seeing that across the campuses in our nation right now.
And it shouldn't be a surprise that anything that puts man at the apex of either knowledge or morality, when you're saying you're the ultimate arbiter, be it a group of guys in 1923 Germany or a group of scientists at the CDC or whomever, it shouldn't be surprising that because human beings are sinful, ultimately it would lead to a totalitarian state. I mean, that's what we see when you start when you start decoupling society from the Christian foundation from which it was birthed, then you start to see these cracks in the framework. You start to see things get a little shaky, and it won't be long before they all, collapse. We're already moving away from a guilt innocence society. That's clear, and we're going to an honor shame society, which is pretty much the default for most humanity. Where it's not your guilt or innocence that condemns you. It's whether you're saying the right things, doing the right things, being on the right side of history, et cetera, et cetera. Which leads us to our next point. Then ultimately, you revert back to what was before Christianity, and we're seeing this again in the Neo-Paganism movement. Matter of fact, I'm getting people telling me, "Hey, Lenny, you know what you really don't need to talk about? That's starting to happen in high school." Witchcraft and pagan resurgences. Those are the things that nobody in the pulpit is talking about. So this is a big concern that a lot of people have, and parents are not even necessarily aware of it yet.
Yeah. Well, and this was something that came up in my discussion with Owen Anderson at ASU as well, who was pointing out that there's these invocations being held now to pre-Christian. So there's been a history at a lot of institutions of doing these apologies to Native American,
right?
Land grabs, right? Where the institution you're working at, high school, college, whatever, before a faculty meeting or something, you make a formal apology to the Native American tribe upon whose stolen land your institute sits. And again, is there some truth in this? Yeah, maybe, of course. I mean, especially if you can identify, if that land really was to a particular part of a particular tribe that then got sent off to some reservation. We get it. We're taking all of history, warts and all, into account. But it's gone further now than just an apology. There's actually more like invocations, the closing the eyes, folding of the hands. Now, an even more egregious form of this was reported by Christopher Rufo, the journalist, who was talking about right up here in LA County a couple of years ago. I wrote a series of articles on this, where school children, K through 12, on some kind of, I don't know, it was a Mexican Heritage Day or something, were being taught taught or compelled to say invocations or prayers to specific Aztec deities, Quetzalcoatl, in the name of social justice. A very odd, bizarre synthesis of Marxism with ancient paganism, religion. So there was an invocation to this Aztec god of war, Quetzalcoatl, and for the sake of bringing social justice and equity to our nation. And school children were saying these things. And, now some people might think, well, this is just a social phenomenon. We don't really believe that Quetzalcoatl exists. But, if you believe that Quetzalcoatl really does exist or potentially exists as something like a demonic god, which if anybody has read the history of the Aztecs,
Oh yeah.
When Paul talks about powers of principalities, spiritual elemental forces of the air, from which we've been liberated from that. It starts to you start to become, and then of course couple that with the anti-colonialism of our day, which is nothing new, but the strong anti-colonialism only brought evil, to native shores, right? Well, of course, it also brought the gospel to native shores, but the anti-colonialism, and also in the critical theory, and especially the critical race theory literature, and I've looked at this, where there's an attack on what is oftentimes called Eurocentricity, reason, dichotomous reason, logical thinking, rationalization, and in some journal articles, the desacralization of nature. That what also the Europeans brought, or the rationalists or the Enlightenment Europeans brought, was sort of this idea that nature is not imbued with its own innate powers and spiritual forces,
Right.
but that it's a creation. So this is just Jewish religion. This is just Old Testament truth, right? So all of this kind of comes together, and I think it shouldn't surprise us if we start to see a return, not just to New Age, which has been with us for a while as an alternative way to seek spirituality, but an actual return to pre-colonial, the worship of pre-colonial folk religions.
And that's and the reason why that's dangerous is because, again, any religious system isn't hermetically sealed. It doesn't stand outside of a larger sphere of understanding. So Quetzalcoatl has to be appeased. And there was a way that the Aztecs would appease them. They would take the captured enemies and they would basically slaughter them alive. They would open up their chests and present their beating hearts to, and they did this. The Aztecs did this. And the archaeologists have basically found the bones to note it. They estimate about 80,000 victims over the course of 1 century. That's a lot of human sacrifice.
Yeah.
Molech, you had to lay out the children, right? So in any sex-driven culture, population control is always the issue because babies come from sexual intercourse. That's just what sexual intercourse does. Is it's meant to produce babies. And so you've always got a baby issue if you have a sexual culture issue. And so how do you dispose of those? And it's usually through some kind of sacrificial system. Now, we try to do ours clean behind Planned Parenthood closed doors, but it's still the same issue. And as that starts to escape, we're going to have more and more problems. This is one of the reasons why Neo-Paganism, and paganism by its nature then starts to pit certain groups against one another. It actually does the opposite of what it's claiming to do in the critical theory sense, and it actually creates hierarchies because my God is better than your God, and my God needs to be appeased instead of your God.
Well,
and you get all that starting. There's no escaping it if you take it to its logical conclusion. I just don't see how you can get out of it.
I mean, there's probably a counter argument of something like, how the Romans allowed for many gods, and
you still had to swear allegiance to Caesar. And the Romans still got to choose whether the Christian God is allowable because again, here's the problem. We'll allow every religion, but Christianity doesn't respect our religion, so therefore we're the ones with the stick. We're the ones with the the sword and the spear, and we're the ones that will throw them to the lions. So it does. Yeah. That's how it always works. You eventually you end up back at that stratified state.
I mean, if it wasn't for where we're at with our technologies, I might be ambivalent to the rise of neo-paganism because it's ground that the church is familiar with.
Right.
If we would just read our church history, it's just a different opponent than the scientific materialists. But it's an opponent that has, in one sense, a lot more similarities, at least metaphysically speaking. We'd have ancient resources. I think Clement Alexandria's To the Heathen pops to mind, where we'd be back sort of in a similar environment where the church was before. So it wouldn't be unexplored territory. I think what makes it unexplored is if it gets coupled with the first issue we dealt with the technologies somehow. And then that's kind of a scary prospect.
Yeah, and you can't put that genie back in the bottle either. So which then leads us to the last item that we had in our list is Christian nationalism. So are Christians doing this? Are they saying we are the superior group? Are they the ones that are saying, hey, everybody needs to, we need to throw out the pagans. We need to throw out all these guys. We need to make this not simply a nation, but a Christian nation. And is that charge even sensible? Does it follow? Is there something called Christian nationalism first and foremost? Because there's so much invective in the world. It's easy to just slap a label on something and saying that's evil. So what are we talking about when we mean Christian nationalism? Does that just mean that you can't be both a believer and patriotic, or does that mean something else?
Well, I mean, and we've been talking about this for a couple months now, and we've had our good friend and colleague Darren Guerra has helped us out with this, who teaches at Biola, Poli-Sci at Biola, and Darren has brought in some speakers there that I've listened to. And my question is always like, well, and I think you need ultimately you need a metaphysical and even a theological foundation for your institutions. There's no escaping that. Right? There's no pure secularism.
No,
we all come to,
secularism has its own baggage, and
we've all studied ethics. I mean, what is the secular ethic? Well, it's a million different things depending on which philosopher you talk to. So you're going to have a your basis for politics and jurisprudence is, at the end of the day, is going to be have to be grounded in something pre-political.
Right.
It's going to have to be grounded in something metaphysical. So you either got to go look at the ancient Greeks, who, I mean, that's also part of the Marxian rejection is of Plato and Aristotle. Or you're going to have to look at theistic religion. Right. And when we look around the world today, as far as I can tell, all other major nations are doubling down on their theistic or religious identities. Turkey's not becoming more secular.
No.
None of the Islamic states are giving up on their Islamic roots. Our friend and colleague Jacob Daniel will talk for days about how India is doubling and tripling down on its Hindu identity. And even China is, I think, showing more and more reaching back to Confucianism. And Confucianism's always there in the Chinese culture. So the question I think is, where else do you want to go if not to Christianity for the foundations of a moral and just society? Where else? Islam? Hinduism? I mean, pick your ism, pick your religion. But I think, and again, back to the neo-paganism, some kind of animism, some kind of animistic. because the further, I was reading a book on Igbo jurisprudence in connection to some of my studies on critical theory. Where does the Igbo tribe in Africa go? Where are they developing their jurisprudence prior to colonialism? It's rooted in animism.
Yeah.
It's rooted in religious belief. So I think the idea that there's a secular foundation for, now I'm going to caveat this, a purely secular foundation for our law and governance is absolute myth. So you need something. Just play that. Now, I forget the gentleman's name who came to Biola a couple months ago that Darren had invited. Dreyer was his last name. And he made a historical case that what the founding fathers were grounding law and jurisprudence on was not special revelation specifically.
Correct.
It's not the Bible. It's what we've always called, we've called for a long, natural law.
Yeah.
All right, which is basically, we see natural law presented to us in places like Romans 1:18-32.
Right.
Okay. So we can find, or Genesis 9, right? Some might relate natural law back to something like the Noahic covenant that is still binding on all people before God gives the Mosaic covenant, which is special to Israel, but still has some of natural law in it, obviously, like the last 6 of the 10 commandments, but not necessarily the first 4.
Mm-hmm.
So it does seem to me, whether or not you want to call it a Christian nation, some atheists have called, like, I think, I don't know, it was Locke's exposition on natural law, Christianity light. Well, call it Christianity light or what you will. It seems to me that what needs to be reinstated to save this civilization is something like the synthesis of Christian understanding of nature with with sort of like the Greco-Roman tradition of the logocentricity.
Yeah.
Logos. So Aristotelian notions of formal and final causation, that there is a teleology in nature. We can't understand it completely, but we get a general sense of what it is. An acorn is always going to turn into an oak tree.
Right.
It's not going to become a giraffe. The end of sexual intercourse, the most natural end of sexual intercourse is the procreation of children, et cetera, et cetera. Certain types of sexual unions don't lead to that, and so on and so forth. So I think at the end of the day, what the goal is a revisioning and a reestablishment of natural law thinking, which is it Christian? Ja, as we'd say in German, Jein, yes and no.
Yes, exactly.
But it's not special revelation.
It's not demanding. It's not demanding fidelity to a specific faith expression. What it is it's admitting what actually centuries of history have proven is that of all of the worldviews, of all of the kind of fundamental presuppositions that society can run upon, the ones that Christianity provides help human beings to flourish better than any other.
Yeah, and you might call it a generic Christianity because and look,
mere
there are different
Christianity
camps on this within the faithful community. There are people who say no, we need a more robust, specifically biblical ground.
Well, but you don't do that. See, and again, this is. And
then there's an evangelical and there's a Catholic version of that.
But the pushback is, and again, it loses all nuance when we start talking about this, either on social media or even in the newspapers. When they throw out the term Christian nationalist, that's almost become a synonym for evangelical. So if you're an American evangelical, you're a Christian
Yeah.
nationalist, and they use these terms with aplomb, just back and forth. And first of all, it's not fair. It's sloppy because those are what they're trying to do is they're trying to taint the concept of Christian with a kind of a white supremacist again oligarchy
Yeah,
or
that's all
total.
part of that critical theory language game
Right.
again.
That's the language game. And so I'm always hesitant when people start saying Christian nationalism is a problem in the church. Are there churches who conflate patriotism and national identity with their Christianity, thinking that you can't be a good Christian unless you're a good patriot, you can't be a good patriot unless you're a good Christian? Yes, I think that can be an issue. I think that there are certain, especially the churches that are more kind of feelings driven churches. Yeah. So a lot in the Pentecostal movement, you see this where they're always looking for that next spiritual high, and you see a lot of they need to feel their their God and their country, and they feel kind of the same. And then you get pastors preaching in that aspect as well. Now, it is true that Christians need to be involved politically because politics, especially politics in the 21st century, has a deep moral component. Most of our political issues that we have today are not, Keynesian economics or whatever. It's not something that technical or that good people might be able to disagree upon. Their issues are a lot clearer in terms of moral frameworks. So, is same-sex marriage good or bad? For the country,
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
well, let me play off two things that you mentioned. One is the painting of Christian nationalism as something like white supremacist.
Yeah.
I would say for our audience, especially if those pastors listen, the term white supremacy, whiteness, it could apply properly to actual neo-Nazi kind of skinhead racists, whatever. Fine. But the way it's being used, I think, is shifting more and more towards just whiteness, white supremacy, just being the actual biblical ethic, biblical morality. I would even say it's basically, at its most fundamental root, it's an attack against what I would call the Jewish sexual ethic. The sexual ethics of biblical Judaism in its most focused sense. I think that's almost what it's going for at this point, right? And the design of the family and how children should be.
Yeah, it's definitely pejorative.
Have children, raise them, and so on and so forth. So that's almost when I hear white or whiteness, that's what I think people are really talking about if they're honest with themselves. But they're using it in a way to make people cower and recoil in fear of being like
don't want to be labeled the hater or don't want to be.
Yeah. Now the other thing is this. Here's an example, though. I think a concrete example of, at least this is my view, because there are these theonomist views and there's these Catholic integralist views that would maybe go a little further in what should be legislated. I don't know. But from a natural law view, and I say this as a layman, you would not legislate saying the Our Father in a public school, right? You're not going to legislate that all school children in LA County public schools before the first bell have to say the Pledge of Allegiance and say the Lord's Prayer.
Although that did exist in prior centuries, yeah.
Yeah. But you would legislate that marriage can only be between a biological man and a biological woman.
Yes, because there's a biological component to what, and there's a
natural law argument.
There's a reason why the state wants to protect that type of a union too.
So those are like two, I think, very concrete maybe examples of what there's maybe a stronger Christian nationalism, which would say, no, we got to have prayer, and maybe the Catholics would want the Hail Mary said in public schools, but where we have to say, look, we've gone beyond natural law in allowing for same-sex marriage, and then everything that has subsequently followed.
Yeah,
right. Which has gotten more.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So I think that's where we're at.
So these are, and again, we've only scratched the surface. What needs to happen, hopefully sometime we can go through some of these, is how to teach pastors to teach their church on A, recognizing one or more of these issues, B, how to respond. We've kind of laid out the problem. We're starting to see it in our culture. Now, how do we train the church to do it? And unfortunately, we just don't have the time to do so today. Right. But that we'll try to explore those more. But these are problems, and I think everyone, none of these should take people by surprise. They should be seeing more and more mention of them in their newspapers. And as we said, I don't know that the pulpit is addressing these things in any kind of a extended way. There are one or two folks out there who may be doing that, but it's.
I know people are worried about getting away from the just the core gospel message, right. And we want to see souls saved. That is the church's. The twofold goal of the church is its holiness, and then its outreach to the lost. And I never, we've talked about pastors being strapped and overwhelmed, and these can be sophisticated issues.
Yeah.
But they do need to be addressed, because we're going to have to live and move and have our being in this whatever world's coming, and be faithful.
Proper ecclesiology follows, as I understand it this way, the role of the church is to equip the saints for sacred service. So our evangelism does need to take place, but it's not reserved for the professional on Sunday morning. The model is more that the pastor on Sunday morning addresses the troops as one would at boot camp, honing their skills, recognizing their gifts. You have a good eye. You should be a sharpshooter. You're not afraid of heights. You should be a paratrooper. You have medical knowledge. Let's put you in the medevac. Right, that's what they do in the army. Right. So similarly, what are your spiritual gifts in the church? Let the church help you develop and expand those gifts so that you can go out into the world and do that evangelism. And part of that calling then is to equip those saints with the knowledge they need in order to engage others with these issues. Yeah.
And I was telling my students, and sometimes it's more head knowledge, sometimes it's just spiritual power. I mean, when you think of like an issue like if you're just engaging directly with certain kind of pagan groups or something, I mean, you don't need to have read a bunch of books, but you better know how to pray in the Spirit.
Yeah, and you better know your Bible. Why that yeah.
And absolutely. Be able to write and able to bring out the power verses.
Yeah. So absolutely.
Well. Right.
All right, Tony. Well, thanks so much. This has been a lot of fun always, and maybe we'll go through and pick some of these issues in order to explore more on how to find these. So great, always great having you with you, and. It's been a wonderful time. So, okay, that should do it for this Come Let Us Reason Together. Thank you guys so much, and to my guest Anthony Costello, great pleasure. So until next time, we'll see you then. Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.